began with a lie that was meant to heal an old wound. Isabella Moretti entered his world every every contract, every deal, every illusion of power he'd ever built. Her heart was trained to stay cold. But revenge has a strange way of rewriting its purpose when love gets in the way. She thought she was ready for anything, until Damian Valente kissed her. The first time she saw him was at a charity gala in the heart of Florence. He stood at the center of the crowd, wearing the quiet authority of a man used to owning every room. His gaze was steady, the kind that made people stop speaking. Damian Valente wasn't just powerful, he was untouchable, or so everyone believed. Isabella didn't. She had studied his life for years, the rise, the rumors, the scandal that had destroyed her family. She blamed him for her father's ruin, for the night when everything she loved vanished into silence. And now she was here to finish what destiny had started. Her plan was simple. Get close enough to make him trust her. Find the evidence that would tear down his empire and vanish before he ever learned her real name. But destiny, as always, had its own script. From the moment their eyes met, something shifted in Damian's world. She wasn't like the others. Her beauty carried shadows, her voice carried truth. He couldn't explain why, but every time she spoke, it felt as if someone had opened a window in a room he had forgotten existed. He should have ignored her. He didn't. Over the following weeks, Isabella became the quiet heartbeat of his office. Smart, efficient, impossible to read. Damian told himself she was just another assistant, but he found excuses to see her. Briefings that could have been emails, late meetings that didn't need to happen. She made him remember what it meant to feel alive, and that scared him more than any rival ever had. For Isabella, every glance from him was a test of will. Each day she told herself she was getting closer to her goal, but her heart was already crossing lines her mind refused to accept. Damian wasn't the monster she had imagined. Beneath his control and precision, there was sorrow, something broken and human. And she couldn't stop wondering what pain had carved the silence in his eyes. One stormy evening, when the rest of the building had emptied, Isabella was still at her desk, working. Lightning lit the sky outside, and the sound of rain filled the glass walls of the penthouse floor. Damian appeared at the door of his office, his voice softer than usual. "Still here?" She looked up. "You said the report couldn't wait." He smiled faintly. "I didn't mean you had to lose your night over it." "I don't mind." He walked closer, the air thickening with every step. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said. She tilted her head. "Is that a good thing?" He hesitated. "I haven't decided." Their eyes met, and for a long moment neither spoke. The thunder outside masked the sound of their hearts betraying them both. Then Damian took a step back, his mask returning. "Go home, Isabella, before this city forgets it's safe." But she didn't move. She didn't know why, but part of her wanted to stay, to see the man behind the power. That night, she went home soaked in rain and guilt. The photo on her wall, the one of her father smiling beside a little girl, seemed to stare back at her like an accusation. She whispered into the silence, "I haven't forgotten, Papa. I won't." But her voice broke on the final word. The next morning, Damian called her into his office. There was tension in the air, something unseen, yet felt. He looked at her across the desk, his expression unreadable. "Isabella," he said slowly, "do you believe people can change?" She frowned. "Depends on what they're running from." He nodded, as if the answer mattered more than she realized. "And what about you? What are you running from?" Her pulse quickened. "Nothing." He smiled faintly. "Everyone runs from something." That was the moment she knew. He saw more than she wanted him to, and for the first time she wasn't sure she could lie to him. Later that week, their paths crossed again, not by design, but by something far more dangerous. Fate, a deal gone wrong, a night soaked in betrayal, and in the middle of it all, a kiss that neither of them planned but both would remember forever. It began as anger, as defiance, as the last act of two people on opposite sides of truth, but it didn't end that way. It ended with silence, trembling hands, and a feeling they would never be able to undo. That kiss was supposed to mean nothing, but from that moment on, nothing in their world would ever be the same. If you've ever felt torn between vengeance and love, between the person you swore to destroy and the one who could heal you, stay with me. This story isn't about perfection, it's about redemption. And sometimes the hardest forgiveness is the one we owe ourselves. Tell me in the comments, can love grow in the same place where revenge once lived? And if you want to see how far this story will go, subscribe. Your support helps us reach our first 100 hearts who believe that love can change even the darkest story. Morning light spilled through the narrow blinds of Isabella's apartment, cutting thin lines across the worn wooden floor. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, Damian Valente, his voice, his eyes, that moment in the rain when the world had gone silent between them. She pressed her palms to her temples, forcing the memory away. Feelings had no place in her mission. She was here for one reason, to destroy him. Her walls were covered with quiet reminders of that purpose. A folder marked Valente Group Holdings, printed records of old financial scandals, and a single photograph of her father smiling at a dinner table that no longer existed. He had been loyal to Damian's company until one decision from above had ruined everything. A forged signature, a false accusation, and her father's reputation was gone overnight. He had never recovered. Isabella still remembered the night he told her the truth. His hands were shaking. "It wasn't my mistake," he had whispered. "Someone needed a scapegoat. I was the easiest name to erase." That was the moment her life changed. Now, years later, she had infiltrated the empire that had destroyed him. She was no longer the frightened daughter of a ruined man. She was the woman who would finish what her father started. When she arrived at Valente Group headquarters, the lobby was already alive with movement. Suits, phones, the hum of ambition filling the air. Her heels echoed across marble as she stepped into the elevator, her reflection cold and composed. She had learned how to hide softness behind precision. People noticed her efficiency, but never her fear. Damian Valente ruled from the top floor, a space of glass, steel, and silence. His reputation was built on control, on a kind of calm that unsettled everyone around him, and Isabella had made herself indispensable to that world. She handled his meetings, his correspondence, even the smallest details of his routine. The closer she was, the easier it would be to find the evidence she needed. But closeness came with a cost. By noon, she stood in his office, holding a stack of reports. Damian was on a call, his voice smooth and low, commanding respect without ever raising a tone. She pretended not to listen, but every word carried weight. When he finally hung up, his eyes lifted to her. "You're quiet today," he said. She forced a small smile. "I have a lot on my mind. Something I should know about?" "No, sir." He leaned back slightly, studying her. "You're not very good at lying." Her pulse skipped. "I didn't realize I was." He smiled faintly. "Most people lie without noticing. You think before you do it. That makes you different." She shifted her weight, uncomfortable. "Would you prefer I didn't think at all?" "I prefer honesty, even when it hurts." His words struck deeper than he intended. Honesty was a luxury she couldn't afford. She lowered her gaze. "Then maybe I'm not the kind of assistant you want." "On the contrary," he said softly, "you're exactly the kind I need." The conversation left her shaken. He had a way of making her feel seen, too seen. Every wall she built seemed to crumble under his gaze. She told herself it was strategy, that every second spent gaining his trust brought her closer to the truth. But that night, when she closed her eyes, She could still hear his voice saying she wasn't good at lying. She hated how right he was. Later that week, Isabella met with her contact, the only person who knew her true purpose. Matteo Romano had been her father's old accountant, a man who had quietly gathered files after the scandal. They met at a small cafe hidden in an alley, far from the gleaming glass towers of the Valente Empire. "You're in deeper than you should be," Matteo said, his voice low. "That's the point," Isabella replied. He frowned. "You're not thinking clearly. Valente isn't the man who forged those papers. You're chasing the wrong ghost." She froze. "What do you mean?" "Your father's case wasn't his doing. Someone higher, someone inside the board, made that call. Damian took the blame for protecting the company. I've seen the records. He kept funding your father's medical bills, even after the dismissal." Her chest, "That's not possible." "Look for yourself," Matteo said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "But be careful. If you keep digging, you'll find people far more dangerous than Damian Valente." She left without answer. Her world felt unstable. Her purpose suddenly uncertain. The idea that Damian had tried to help her father was something she couldn't accept. Not yet. She needed proof. The next morning, Damian called her to accompany him to a meeting out of town. "You'll need to take notes," he said. Of course. The drive was long, through winding coastal roads that shimmered under sunlight. Isabella sat beside him in silence, her thoughts tangled. He drove with calm focus, one hand resting on the wheel, the other occasionally brushing his cufflink in thought. "You've been distracted," he said suddenly. She blinked. "I'm fine." "No," he said quietly. "You're not." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do you care?" He smiled faintly. "Because I don't like mysteries I can't solve." She turned away, hiding the turmoil in her chest. The man she was supposed to hate spoke with disarming gentleness. The world was no longer divided into right and wrong. It was something far more dangerous. At the meeting, Isabella watched him handle negotiations with elegance. He was decisive but fair, commanding but calm. The way people looked at him, half admiration, half fear, reminded her of how power could shape a man into something both noble and dangerous. She saw the humanity beneath his armor, and it unsettled her. That evening, as they walked back to the car, a light rain began to fall. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning everything gold and glass. She pulled her coat tighter around her. "Do you always work this hard?" she asked. He glanced at her. "When you build something from ashes, you don't stop to rest." "Whose ashes?" His eyes darkened. "My father's." The silence that followed was fragile. 2 lives, 2 losses, unknowingly connected by the same wound. They reached the car, and she slipped, her heel catching on the curb. Before she could fall, his hand caught her wrist, firm and steady. The world seemed to slow. Their eyes met again, closer than before. Rain dripped from his hair onto her cheek. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. He didn't release her. "You're freezing," he said softly. "I'm fine." "You're not," he murmured. And then, without thinking, he brushed his thumb against her jaw, wiping away a drop of rain or maybe a tear. The touch burned like a confession. She should have stepped back, but she didn't. Neither did he. Their breaths mingled, their silence louder than thunder. It wasn't planned. It wasn't meant to happen, but it did. His lips found hers, brief, hesitant, searching for something neither of them understood. When they finally pulled apart, the world returned heavy and real. She turned away, trembling. "That shouldn't have happened." "I know," he said, "but it did." She looked at him then, and for the first time, she saw not the enemy, not the man she came to destroy, but the man who could ruin her heart. Back at the office, Isabella couldn't focus. Every time she passed his door, she felt his gaze linger. No words were exchanged, but everything had changed. That night, she opened Matteo's flash drive. The documents were real. Bank transfers, hospital payments, private notes signed DV. He had been helping her father in secret, The truth hit her harder than any lie could. If he wasn't the villain, then who was? Her mission was collapse. Her heart was betraying her. The next day, she arrived at work, determined to confront him. But before she could speak, the elevator doors opened and two men in black suits stepped out. She had never seen them before. They whispered something to Damian, who nodded grimly. When he looked at her, his eyes were different, cold, calculating. "Go home, Isabella," he said quietly. "Now." "Why?" "Because you don't belong here today." She didn't understand, but something in his tone told her not to argue. She turned and left, her pulse racing. From the car window, she saw him speaking to the men, his expression unreadable. For the first time, she realized Damian Valente wasn't just a man of power. He was a man standing on the edge of danger. And now she was standing there with him, whether she wanted to or not. As her car disappeared into the night, Damian watched the taillights fade, his jaw set. One of the men beside him spoke. "She's the key, isn't she?" He didn't answer. He just said quietly, "Make sure she stays alive." Because even though he didn't fully understand it yet, she had already become the one thing he couldn't lose. He returned to the tower with a silence that made even the elevators feel cautious. The city leaned against the glass, all light and distance, while Damian pretended not to count the seconds since he had last seen her. He had told Isabella to go home, but the word home felt like a lie these days. Safety had become a rumor. On the top floor, he removed his jacket and called security. Rafael Conte, a man who spoke in short sentences and kept his promises, appeared in the doorway. "Background sweeps," Damian said. "Everyone hired within the past year. Cross-check personal and financial records. Discretion." Rafael nodded. "Including Miss Moretti?" Damian hesitated for a heartbeat. "Especially her." Left alone, he stared at the skyline until the windows blurred. Every instinct warned him he was walking toward a choice that would not forgive him later. He had built a life on reading risk like scripture, but he could not read Isabella. And it wasn't because she was hiding. It was because something about her made him want to stop looking for the exit. Downstairs, whispers tightened around her name. She felt it the next morning when she returned. How eyes changed shape when she passed. How doors closed a little faster. Isabella moved through it without breaking stride. She had learned to make grace look like armor. She reached her desk to find a sealed envelope with her first name. Inside, a single line written in a precise hand. "The board is meeting off calendar. 6 p.m., conference room C. No aides, no notes." Isabella's pulse tripped. An off-calendar board session meant something was breaking, or someone was about to be pushed until they did. She angled the card beneath the keyboard and began to work as if nothing had happened. At noon, Damian called her in. "Vienna expects signatures tonight," he said, sliding a file forward. "We won't rush them. Let it sit on their desk for an hour before you call." She nodded. "Understood." He didn't release the file. "You look like you're carrying a secret." "Then you're seeing things," she said gently. "I usually am," he replied, and the corner of his mouth almost smiled, as if even his restraint wanted a reason to give way. The afternoon stretched, measured by decisions large enough to move markets and small enough to betray a person's heart. At 5:58, Isabella slipped into a service corridor and watched the reflection of conference room C on the polished steel of a maintenance door. She didn't enter, she listened. Voices moved like knives wrapped in silk. "We warned him," a man said, older, patient. "Attachment is a weakness," another answered, velvet over ice. "He's exposing the house for a woman we didn't vet." "Then we vet her the old way," a third voice offered. "And if she doesn't pass, we close the door." Chairs scraped. A glass touched wood. A pause pulled the oxygen out of the air. "And Valente?" the older voice asked. "We remind him who built the floor he stands on." Footsteps approached. Isabella drifted back into shadow, counting to 5 before breathing again. When the corridor emptied, she pressed her palms against the cool metal to quiet the tremor in her bones. She didn't have proof, only the shape of a threat. But shapes were how storms introduced themselves. That evening, the office thinned. She should have gone home. Instead, she took the long way to the archive, where the building kept paper forms because paper can't be deleted with a keystroke. She found a file labeled Vendor Exception tucked behind a mislabeled binder as if someone wanted it to be found only by someone who insisted she did. Inside, a series of transfers to a rehabilitation clinic appeared under an anonymous donor code used by corporate philanthropy. The memo line was empty on each entry, except one, a single note left years ago, not by the foundation but by a personal account, handwritten and scanned into the ledger. For the debt I couldn't pay with truth. Her breath locked. The signature was not printed. It was a flourish at the bottom, quiet and unmistakable. D. Valente. She closed the file and pressed her eyes until the room stopped wavering. If the world had been simpler, that note would have absolved everything, but the world had learned to walk with complexity as if it were a friend. When she emerged, Damian was waiting in the hallway like he had always been standing there. He didn't ask what she had found. He read her face instead. "Come with me," he said. They stepped into the stairwell, the one place in the tower where sound landed and stayed. He stood 2 steps below her, close enough that his voice didn't have to travel far. "I told you to go home yesterday," he said. "You didn't?" "You didn't either." He almost smiled. No. For a moment, they were 2 people who had nothing left to trade but honesty. "They met," she said. "The board. Off calendar." His eyes cooled. "Who told you that?" "No one. I heard enough. Names. Only voices." He nodded, and the nod was not relief. It was the confirmation a man gives himself when the math equals the warning. "They won't be patient." "Neither will I," she said. Too fast, too honest. He took 1 step upward. The distance between them shrank until it became the kind of distance when breath counts. "Isabella," he said quietly, "I can protect you from them. I'm not sure I can protect you from what happens to me when I do." She didn't look away. "Then protect the truth and let it protect us both." He exhaled like a bargain was finally named. "Stay close tomorrow. No unplanned routes, no meetings I didn't approve. If something feels wrong, you call me before you do anything else. I'm not a liability," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's exactly why you're a target." On the street that night, rain arranged itself into a curtain and a black sedan idled without headlights. From the back seat, Silas Grimaldi, the velvet voice from the meeting, and a man who had never raised his tone because he never had to, watched the tower's doors with a patience that didn't belong to the city. "She's become leverage," he said, almost kindly, "and leverage is meant to be used." The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "And if Valente refuses to bend?" Silas rested his wrist over the top of the seat. "Then we learn what he is worth without the empire he thinks is his." Morning rebuilt routine like a stage crew repairing a set after a difficult act. Isabella walked into the lobby and knew immediately something had been touched in the night. A receptionist who always smiled looked past her. A security guard who always nodded studied her badge a second longer. Small edits, large meanings. At her desk, a single white tulip waited in a slim glass. No card. Just a bloom that meant apology in a language most people had forgotten. She didn't need the card to know. She knew his handwriting even when it wasn't there. By noon, a fire drill forced the tower to spill itself into the street. Cold air, hot impatience, bodies collecting into squares of inconvenience. Isabella stood on the curb and scanned the crowd until she found him across the lane. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. The city could have disappeared and she would still have seen him. The alarm cut off. People began to file back in. A shift occurred, so subtle it would not appear on cameras. A hand she didn't recognize brushed against her coat as if passing, and a voice said without moving lips, "You're late." She turned. The face had already become another face in the crowd. Damian was suddenly there, as if pulled by that same gravitational disturbance. "With me," he said, guiding her back into the building through a service entrance. He rarely touched her in public. He did now. In the loading corridor, he released her arm and spoke into his phone. "Raphael, eyes on our floors immediately. We're done being surprised." He ended the call and looked at Isabella. "Tell me everything you heard last night." She did, in quick sentences, without ornaments. When she finished, he leaned against the concrete wall, closed his eyes for the length of a slow inhale, and then opened them with the kind of calm that is not peace, but a decision. "They'll try to isolate you," he said, "make you doubt, push you to run. If you run, they win. What if they come for you first?" He smiled without mirth. "They already did, years ago. That's why I know their handwriting." The day narrowed into a point. Contracts paused. Calls went unanswered on purpose. By early evening, Raphael pushed open the door to Damian's office with a folder he held like it wanted to jump from his hand. "You asked for everyone's records," he said, voice steady because he had practiced it in the hall. "You need to see this." Damian didn't take the folder immediately. He looked at Isabella, seated across from him, a cup of tea she hadn't sipped growing colder by degrees. He didn't want answers to be cruel. He took the folder anyway. Inside, a series of scans, employment history, academic placements, a birth certificate, a newspaper clipping so old its ink looked like dust, a photograph of a man standing at a factory gate, smiling toward a daughter who held his hand like a promise. The headline, "Local Manager Cleared in Fraud Probe, Board Member Steps Down," and a name he knew, Giancarlo Moretti. Damian swallowed a question he wasn't sure he had a right to ask. He turned the page. Another clipping, another headline. The board member who had fallen had a patron. The patron had not. Silas Grimaldi. Raphael spoke quietly. She didn't falsify credentials. She shortened them, kept the name but lost the history. The father's case was buried in a settlement that never touched daylight. Damian closed the folder and pressed it flat as if pressure could prevent the past from standing up again. He lifted his eyes to Isabella, who watched him without flinching. She already knew what he held. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Not as an accusation, not even as a demand, as a man who had spent too long speaking the language of walls and wanted to learn the vocabulary of doors. "I thought you were the one who pushed him," she said, and her voice didn't break. It steadied. "I came here to end the hand that wrote the order. And now I want the handwriting." Outside the office, the tower's lights lowered into evening. Inside, a choice unfolded like a road no one wanted to admit they would take. Damian turned to Raphael. "Move her to the safe suite. No one but you brings her food. No one enters without my voice. And send a message to Grimaldi's office." What message?" Raphael asked. "That I'm done mistaking silence for loyalty." Raphael left. The door closed. Quiet rearranged itself into intimacy and risk. Damian crossed the room and sat across from Isabella. He reached for her hand and didn't take it. He let the space above it hold his gesture. "I made a promise a long time ago," he said, eyes on the place where their hands almost met. "To the people who thought they made me. I kept it until it became a lie. I'm taking that promise back." She finally placed her fingers against his. The contact was not dramatic. It was the kind of touch that says, "If we fall, we don't fall alone. If you are with me," he said, "you'll be in the line of fire. I already am." He lifted her hand and pressed it once, a vow said without words. "Then we move." That night, the safe suite felt like a chapel, quiet, spare, full of the kind of air that waits for confessions. Isabella lay on the sofa with a blanket at her ankles and a book open but unread on her chest. She wasn't afraid of dark rooms anymore. She had learned that darkness could be honest when daylight refused to be. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She didn't answer. The second message arrived with a sound like a coin on marble. "We both know what he is worth without the Empire." A photograph followed, taken at a distance, grainy and precise. She and Damian on the stairwell, 2 steps apart. The timestamp was today. The third message included an address she recognized, though she'd never been there. A private airfield outside the city. A time. A warning dressed as an invitation. "If you want the truth, come alone." Isabella stood and walked to the window. Below, the river tore the city into 2 parts that pretended they were whole. She thought of her father, the man who had taught her to keep her word, even when the world didn't. She thought of Damian, the man who had signed a debt with his own name because the truth wouldn't accept currency. She typed a reply and deleted it. Truth doesn't come when called. It waits where the ground turns unreliable. The doorknob clicked. Raphael entered with a tray and the expression of a man who could hear electricity. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and wondered when she had learned to lie so softly it sounded like a lullaby. He set the tray down and left as quietly as he had come. The lock engaged. The room exhaled. Isabella took a pen from the desk and wrote a single sentence on the first page of the book, because if someone found it later, they would understand the shape of her choice. You cannot break a cycle by walking in circles. She slipped on her coat, pulled the door open, and stepped into the corridor. Across the city, Damian waited for a call he knew would not come. When Raphael returned to the office with an empty tray and an expression that did not want to be named, the air between them changed. "She's not in the room," Raphael said. Damian stood. The chair didn't scrape. Even gravity understood urgency. He grabbed his keys and the folder, because sometimes the past has to ride in the front seat when the future insists on driving. The phone flashed. A blocked message slid onto the screen with the softness of a blade wrapped in cloth. "If you want her to walk out of this, come alone." He didn't think. He didn't argue. He moved, and as the tower's lights sank into the river, a single black car left the underground garage, carrying a man who knew that love and war have the same address when the heart becomes a battlefield. Tell us in the comments what you would do in Isabella's place. Follow the invitation alone or trust the man who finally chose truth over fear. Your words help us shape the next turn. And if you want to walk with us through this storm to the other side, subscribe and help us reach our first 100 hearts. There's more waiting at the airfield than a message and a threat. There's a door no one expects to open. The airfield sat beyond the edge of the city, where the lights surrendered to darkness and the wind carried secrets instead of answers. The night was cold enough to bite, and the silence hummed like electricity before a storm. Isabella's car stopped at the gate. The security lights flickered once, then stayed on, as if the place had been waiting for her. She stepped out, her coat pressed against the wind. No guards, no voices, just the hollow sound of her heels against the concrete. A single hangar stood open at the far end, its interior bathed in pale light. Something metallic glinted inside. She hesitated, her instincts screaming that she should have turned back. But she had made her choice the moment she read that message. Inside the hangar, a table waited with a single envelope resting on it. No name, only the Valente Group seal embossed in silver. She reached for it, her fingers trembling. Before she could open it, a voice cut through the air. "I was hoping you'd listen to instructions better than this." She spun around. Damian stood near the doorway, his coat dark against the floodlight behind him, rain still on his shoulders. He had driven there himself, no escort, no bodyguards, just determination. His eyes locked on hers, torn between anger and fear. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. I could ask you the same, he said quietly. You think I didn't know you'd come? They wanted you alone. That message wasn't a warning. It was bait. Her heartbeat thundered. Then why come at all? Because they knew I would. He stepped closer, voice low. You're not the one they want, Isabella. You're just how they make me choose. The words struck her harder than the cold. Then why risk everything? He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Because I made you a promise. Something in her broke. You didn't have to keep it. I did. Because you were the first truth in a world full of lies. The wind howled outside, shaking the doors. A car engine roared in the distance, followed by headlights slicing through the darkness. Damian's body tensed instantly. They're here. She turned toward the open hangar doors. Who are they? The people who think they still own me. The lights grew brighter, the rumble closer. Damian grabbed her hand. Stay behind me. He led her toward a narrow passage between the hangars. But before they could reach the other side, 3 men emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden by raincoats. One of them stepped forward, his voice smooth and venomous. Damian, he said, always running toward the wrong woman. Silas, Damian replied evenly. You should have stayed in your boardroom. I tried, Silas said, but you brought your war to my door. You made it mine when you destroyed her father. Silas smiled faintly. He was an inconvenience, just like she is. Isabella felt Damian's grip tighten. The air between them burned with unspoken rage. Silas took another step forward. You think you can rewrite the past? You were never meant to be free, Damian. You were meant to obey. Damian's voice hardened. Not anymore. The next moments happened fast. A scuffle, the sound of feet against concrete, the sharp metallic click of a safety being pulled back. Isabella's breath froze. Damian moved instinctively, pulling her behind a crate, shielding her with his body, as a warning shot echoed through the hangar. The bullet hit metal, sparks scattering like shattered stars. Silas laughed softly. You're too sentimental. It's gonna cost you. Damian raised his head from cover. Maybe, but at least it won't cost her. Silas gestured toward the envelope still on the table. That's everything you've been chasing. Proof, names, accounts. You could have had it all without the performance. Now you'll lose it anyway. Damian looked at Isabella. He's lying. She shook her head. No, he's trying to make you choose again. I already did, he said. He stood before she could stop him, walking straight toward Silas. His voice was low, steady, the sound of someone who had made peace with the price. You can keep your empire, Damian said, but you don't touch her. Silas tilted his head. And if I do? Then you lose everything else. They stared at each other, the world shrinking to 2 men divided by a single heartbeat. Then Silas smiled, a small, cruel thing, and turned to leave. You've already lost, Valente. You just don't see it yet. The cars pulled away, leaving silence and the scent of rain on metal. Isabella exhaled shakily. They'll come back. I know, Damian said, which is why we won't be here when they do. He took her hand again, this time without hesitation. They moved quickly toward a second hangar. Inside, a small private plane waited, engine humming softly, lights already on. We'll be safe for a while, he said, guiding her up the steps. As the plane lifted into the night, Isabella turned to him. Where are we going? Somewhere no one remembers our names. Say, the city disappeared beneath the clouds. For a long time, neither spoke. The hum of the engine filled the silence between them, until she finally said, You knew they'd use me. Why didn't you push me away? He looked at her, eyes darker than the night outside. Because I tried once, and it felt like losing the only part of myself that was still alive. She swallowed hard. Damian, this can't last. He smiled sadly. Maybe not. But for now, it's real. She looked out the window, the stars faint above the storm. I don't even know what I believe anymore. Then believe in what you feel, he said quietly. That's the only truth they can't steal. When the plane landed hours later, dawn was breaking over a quiet coast. They stepped onto the runway. The sky streaked with gold. The air smelled of salt and freedom. Isabella turned toward him, the wind catching her hair. "So this is where the story ends?" she asked softly. "No," Damian said, stepping closer. "This is where it begins." He reached for her hand. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath again, like that night in the rain, but different. No lies, no walls, no power left to protect. Just two people standing on the edge of something fragile and real. Then he kissed her, not out of anger not out of fear, but because there was nothing left to hide behind. The kiss was quiet, but it carried everything. The loss, the forgiveness, the surrender. It was the moment the world stopped being divided between revenge and love. It became one truth, shared between two people who had been broken by both. When they pulled apart, he whispered against her hair, "You changed everything." She smiled faintly. "So did you." And as the sun rose over the horizon, its light touched the ocean like a promise. A promise that love, once born from pain, could still find its way home. But far away, in a boardroom bathed in morning light, Silas Grimaldi poured himself a glass of wine and looked at a screen displaying two names, Damian Valente, Isabella Moretti. He smiled, cold and satisfied. "Run as far as you want," he murmured. "I built the map." He closed the laptop, unaware that a single file within it was already being copied, by a system he didn't know existed, one that Isabella's father had created years before he died. A truth was waking, and it would burn brighter than any empire. The rain had returned to the coast like an old memory. The sound against the villa's roof echoed through the halls, steady and patient. Isabella stood at the window, her reflection ghosted by dawn's pale light. Damian was still asleep in the next room, exhaustion softening the sharpness that usually shaped his face. For the first time he looked unguarded, human, but peace had never been made to last in their world. She turned her phone over in her hands. The last message from Silas still glowed faintly on the screen. She hadn't told Damian about it. The address, the invitation, the proof. She didn't know if she could. Something about the tone in that message felt like her father's handwriting on the edge of a warning. When the first light spilled across the sea, she finally made her decision. She opened her laptop, plugged in the small flash drive Matteo had given her weeks before, and clicked on the folder titled Valente Files. The drive took a moment to load, as if waking from years of silence. Inside were hundreds of documents, contracts, letters, payment trails, but one folder was locked with a passcode. She typed her father's birthday. Nothing. Then she tried hers. Still nothing. Finally, she remembered a phrase he used to whisper to her as a child whenever she was afraid of storms. La verità non dorme. Truth never sleeps. The lock clicked open. Inside was a single video file, dated 15 years earlier. She pressed play. Her father appeared on the screen, sitting at his old desk, eyes weary but alive. "If you're seeing this," he began, "then I've already failed to protect what matters. The men behind Valente Group are not builders, they are thieves. Damian Valente is not your enemy. He doesn't even know the truth he's protecting. The order that destroyed me came from above him, from Silas Grimaldi and his partners. They use Damian's name because it carries trust. He's the shield they hide behind." Isabella's hand trembled over the keyboard. Her father leaned closer to the camera. "I left evidence in the company archives, account numbers, offshore transfers, and a name you must remember, Project Ardent. It's the heart of their operation. Find it before they find you." The screen went dark. Her throat tightened, her breath shallow. For years she had built her life on the idea that Damian Valente had stolen everything from her. And now, the truth said otherwise. He hadn't been her father's destroyer. He had been his cover, his protection. The man she came to ruin had once tried to save the only person she loved. She wiped her tears and copied the folder onto her laptop. Then she heard movement behind her. Damian stood in the doorway, his hair tousled, his voice low from sleep. "You're up early." She turned the screen toward the window instinctively. "I couldn't sleep." He stepped closer. Neither could I. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching for the truth she was trying to hide. "You've found something." Her lips parted, but the words tangled. "Your name was never the reason my father fell." He froze. "What did you say?" She swallowed. "It was Silas. He used you." He moved closer, eyes locked on hers. "How do you know?" "Because my father told me," she said, turning the laptop toward him and pressing play again. He watched in silence, his jaw tightening with every word. When the video ended, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands pressed together. "He knew," Damian whispered. "All this time, he knew." Isabella's voice broke. "And he died protecting your name." He stood, pacing toward the window, anger and guilt fighting in his eyes. "They used both of us, him for silence, me for reputation. They still are," she said softly. He turned, his expression hardening with a new kind of resolve. "Then we stop them." Her chest tightened. "How? They have everything, the board, the lawyers, the power." "Not everything," he said. "They don't have the truth." He crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "You're not alone anymore, Isabella. I swear to you, whatever they took from your father, we'll bring it to light." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in something that wasn't built on loss. "You'll make enemies." "I already have." The air between them thickened again, charged with something too deep to name. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle but sure. "When this is over," he whispered, "whatever happens to me, don't let them take you too." Her eyes glistened. "Damian." Before she could finish, his phone buzzed sharply. He glanced down. The color drained from his face. "They found us." "How?" "Raphael's tracker." "They turned him." Her heart sank. "We have to go." He nodded once, already moving. "Pack what you can." She closed the laptop, clutching it to her chest. "Damian, wait." He stopped at the door, turning toward her. "If something happens, if we're separated, the video and the files are everything. It's proof. I won't let us be separated." She forced a small, trembling smile. "You can't promise that." He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. "Watch me." Within minutes, the villa was a storm of movement. Bags, files, keys, silence broken by urgency. Outside, the low hum of engines echoed in the distance. Damian took her hand and led her through a back path to the cliffs. Below, the sea churned like liquid steel. "Down there," he said. "There's a service tunnel that leads to the docks. Raphael showed me years ago. And if they're already waiting, then we make them regret it." They moved quickly through the rain, their footsteps swallowed by the sound of waves. The tunnel appeared ahead, half hidden by vines and thyme. But as they reached the entrance, headlights flashed across the cliffside. Voices shouted. Silas's men had arrived. Damian pulled her against the wall, eyes scanning the slope. "There's another way." "Where?" He pointed toward the rocks below. "The tide's rising. We can use the current to reach the dock's inlet." She stared at him. "That's insane." "Everything worth saving it." He took her hand, and together they ran, their silhouettes swallowed by the storm. Behind them, Silas's men spread across the ridge, flashlights slicing through the night. By the time they reached the inlet, the water was rough and wild. Damian helped her down first, guiding her into the small motorboat hidden beneath the rocks. "Hold on," he said, starting the... "Once we hit open water, we'll head north." The waves rose higher, the rain falling harder. She turned back toward the cliffs, watching the lights vanish in the mist. "They'll follow. Then we'll stay ahead." For a while, the only sound was the storm. She looked at him, soaked and silent, steering through chaos with steady hands. "Damian, why didn't you tell me? About my father, about all of it." He didn't look at her. "Because I didn't think I deserved to." Her eyes softened. "You were wrong." He glanced at her then, a faint, tired smile breaking through the rain. "Maybe." Lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating their faces. For a brief second, the world looked like it had paused just for them. caught between what was lost and what was still possible. He reached over, brushing the water from her cheek. "You're shaking. So are you." He laughed softly, the sound almost breaking. "Then maybe we're both still alive." And then, for the second time, he kissed her, not as escape, not as apology, but as a vow. The storm roared around them, but neither looked away. When they pulled apart, the engine sputtered. Damian's gaze shifted toward the shore. "They're coming." She turned to see silhouettes descending the cliffside, lights moving like ghosts through the rain. "Go!" she cried. He pushed the throttle forward. The boat surged into the open sea, waves crashing against its hull. Behind them, the shore faded. Ahead, the horizon waited, unknown, dangerous, free. And far away, in an office of glass and silence, Silas watched the live satellite feed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let them run," he murmured. "They're running straight into history." Because the files Isabella carried didn't just expose corruption. They held something more dangerous, proof that the empire itself was built on a lie. The wind softened as dawn rose over the open water. The sea, restless hours before, began to calm into glass. Damian cut the engine and let the boat drift. Behind them, the coast was a faint shadow swallowed by fog. Ahead, the horizon looked endless. For the first time since everything began, there was silence, the kind that comes only after survival. Isabella wrapped herself in a blanket and watched the sun push through the clouds. Her hands were cold, but her mind wouldn't stop burning. She had the files, she had the truth, but she also had him. And that changed everything. Damian stood at the bow, scanning the horizon. His clothes were soaked, his hair damp from salt, but his focus was sharp as ever. He turned to her finally, his voice rough from the cold. "We'll stop at the next island. It's small, quiet. We can rest for a day, maybe 2. She nodded. "And then? Then we decide what kind of people we want to be." The words lingered between them. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation and a confession. Damian Valente, the man she once swore to destroy, was now the only person she trusted with her life. By midday, they reached a secluded bay hidden between cliffs. Old fishermen once lived there, but the cabins were long abandoned. The sea carried a silence that felt sacred. Damian secured the boat, and they climbed onto the rocks. Isabella followed him to one of the cabins, the door creaking open to reveal a single bed, a table, and a stove that hadn't been lit in years. "It's perfect," she said softly. "For hiding," he answered. She dropped the bag on the table and looked at him. "We can't hide forever." He met her gaze, steady, tired. "No, but we can think before we strike." He knelt to light the stove, his movements slow, precise. The small flame came alive, painting his face in amber light. Isabella sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. For a while, neither spoke. The fire cracked. The sea whispered through the open door. Finally, she said, "You still care about them, don't you? The company, the empire." He smiled faintly, eyes on the flame. "I care about what it could have been, what it was before they turned it into a weapon. And now it's a ghost, like me." She hesitated. "What are you planning to do with the truth?" He looked at her then, the flicker of the fire reflecting in his eyes. "That depends on you, on me. You're the one who carries it. You could destroy them all. Or you could save what's left." Her throat tightened. "And what would you do?" "I'd burn it down," he said quietly. "But only if you can walk away from the ashes." She looked down, the truth heavier than she expected. For so long, revenge had been her only language. Now it felt foreign, replaced by something she couldn't define. "And if I can't?" He stood, walked to her, and crouched beside her. "Then I'll find another way, one that doesn't cost you your soul." She met his eyes. "Why do you care so much?" "Because I've already lost everything once. I won't lose you too." The words were simple, but they hit deep. She reached for his hand without thinking, fingers trembling. He didn't pull away. The world outside the cabin disappeared. The storm inside them finally began to settle. By nightfall, the sky turned indigo, scattered with stars. They ate in silence, canned soup, dry bread, and quiet thoughts. Isabella sat by the door, laptop open, the files glowing faintly on the screen. Damian watched her from across the room, his expression unreadable. "You're going to open them again," he said. "I have to. The world needs to see what they did." He walked to the window. "And when the world sees, it'll ask for blood. They'll destroy you before they admit the truth." "Then let them try," she said. "I've lived too long in someone else's shadow." He turned to her, his voice low. "Isabella, listen to me. Once this goes public, there's no coming back. You'll lose your name, your safety, your peace." She closed the laptop and looked at him. Maybe that's the price of being free. He exhaled slowly, crossing the room to stand beside her. "If freedom means losing you, it's not worth it." She smiled sadly. "Then what are we fighting for?" He hesitated. "For a world that lets us choose." The fire dimmed to embers. Outside, the tide rose higher, whispering against the rocks. Isabella reached out and touched his arm, her voice a whisper. "You can't keep protecting me from everything." "I'm not," he said. "I'm protecting what's left of us." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and rain. She looked up at him, her heart racing. "And if there's nothing left to protect, then we build something new." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said. He lifted her hand slowly, as if afraid she might pull away. When she didn't, his fingers intertwined with hers. The world outside blurred into darkness, and for a brief moment it felt like they had outrun fate itself. Hours later, long after the fire died, Damian sat awake, his back against the wall, watching her sleep. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breath soft, steady. He reached for her laptop quietly, opening the file she had been afraid to finish reading. Inside was a second document, one her father had marked, "If found, deliver to DV." Damian clicked it open. The letter was addressed to him. "I know what they've done to you. You were never the villain, Damian. You were the wall they used to keep the truth from the world. My daughter believes you ruined me, but one day she'll know you tried to save me. When that day comes, don't let her carry my fight alone. Make it right for both of us." Damian's hands trembled as he closed the letter was old, but the words felt alive, like a ghost breathing forgiveness into a man who had forgotten how to accept it. He looked at Isabella sleeping beside him and whispered into the quiet, "I'll make it right, I promise." By morning, the sea had calmed completely. A soft fog hugged the cliffs, and birds called somewhere beyond the mist. Isabella woke to find him standing outside, phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in a low, steady voice. "Yes, this is Valente. I'm ready to talk." Her heart froze. "Who are you calling?" He ended the call and turned to her. "An old friend, someone who can help us publish everything, safely." "You're going to expose them?" He nodded. "Not just them, all of it, every name, every secret." "Your father deserves that." She looked at him, uncertain. "And what happens after?" He smiled faintly. "We'll see. Maybe we disappear. Maybe we start over. But for the first time, it'll be on our terms." She stepped closer, the sunlight catching her hair. "You really believe we can survive this?" He brushed his thumb against her cheek. "I don't know, but I believe we should try." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "Then I'll try too." The moment stretched, fragile but real. Two souls who had lived too long in shadows finding light again. And just as peace began to settle, the sound of a helicopter broke the quiet sky. Damian's head snapped upward. "They found us." She looked at him, fear flashing across her face. "What do we do?" He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "We run again if we have to, but this time we don't run from the truth." The helicopter drew closer, its blades tearing through the fog. The old cabin shook under the sound. Damian pulled her toward the back exit, toward the cliffs where the sea waited once more. "Whatever happens, he said, his voice steady even as the wind roared around them. "We finish this together." And as they disappeared into the rising mist, the first drops of rain began to fall, the kind that announces a storm big enough to wash away everything that came before. The roar of the helicopter grew louder, echoing through the cliffs like thunder that refused to fade. Isabella ran beside Damian, her hand still locked in his, their footsteps sliding over wet stone. The fog clung to them like breath, blurring shapes into shadows. Somewhere above, the sea crashed against the rocks, each wave a warning from the world itself. "Keep low," Damian shouted over the wind. "There's an old tunnel beyond the ridge. It connects to the lighthouse." "How do you know?" He glanced at her briefly. "Because I built it years ago, for nights like this." They climbed the last stretch of cliff, the air heavy with salt and noise. The helicopter's lights cut through the fog, sweeping across the landscape like searching eyes. Damian pushed Isabella toward a narrow opening in the rock and motioned for silence. Inside, the tunnel was dark, damp, and ancient. He found a lantern and lit it, the soft flame trembling in his hand. "Are they going to follow us in here?" she whispered. He listened to the fading hum of blades. "No. They'll circle until they believe we're trapped. That gives us time." She leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "Time for what?" "To finish what we started." The tunnel twisted downward, each step leading them closer to the base of the cliffs. The air grew colder, heavier with the scent of the sea. Isabella carried her laptop pressed to her chest as if it were a living thing. The files inside, her father's truth, were the one weapon they had left. They reached the end of the passage where a wooden door opened onto a narrow stairway. The old lighthouse loomed above them, its glass dome shattered by storms long past. Damian pushed the door open. The room was filled with dust, rusted machinery, and the kind of silence that only abandoned places keep. "This is where my father used to bring me when I was a child," Damian said quietly. "He said the world looked honest from here. You could see everything. The light, the sea, the storms. You couldn't pretend anymore." Isabella set the laptop on the table. "Maybe that's why we came here." He looked at her, and for a moment, there was no sound but the ocean breathing below them. "You could still walk away, Isabella. Take the files, vanish before they find us. You don't owe me anything." She met his gaze. "You're wrong. I owe you the truth. And I owe my father the ending he never got." He smiled faintly. "You sound like him. Maybe I finally understand him." She turned on the laptop, the screen lighting the room in pale blue. The signal was weak, but it existed. "If we connect to a satellite line," she said, "I can send the files anonymously. Every document, every recording, every name. The world will see what they built. The frauds, the bribes, the disappearances. All of it." Damian moved beside her, his voice steady but low. "Once you do that, Silas will come for us himself." "Then let him," she whispered. "I'm tired of running." He placed a hand on her shoulder, his warmth grounding her. "So am I." They waited as the files began to upload, progress crawling slowly across the screen. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. The wind had turned violent again, beating against the lighthouse windows. Damian watched the signal flicker, his mind already calculating escape routes. Then the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the stairwell. Isabella froze. "Did you hear that?" He nodded once, eyes narrowing. "Stay behind me." The lantern flame wavered as a figure appeared in the doorway, drenched from the rain. Silas Grimaldi stepped into the light with a calm that didn't belong to storms. He looked older now, as if the years of deception had finally begun to carve through his charm. "I should have known you'd come here," Silas said. "Your father always did love this place." Damian's voice was calm, sharp. "It ends tonight." "Does it?" Silas stepped closer, glancing at the laptop on the table. "You think truth will save you?" "The world doesn't care about truth, Damian. It cares about power." "Maybe," Damian said, "but I'm done carrying yours." Silas's smile thinned. "You were never meant to carry it. You were meant to protect it." And you've done that beautifully until now. He turned his gaze to Isabella. And you're your father's daughter after all. Idealistic, brave, foolish. She lifted her chin. And you're the reason he's gone. No, Silas said softly. Your father died believing he could change the world. That's what killed him. Damian moved between them, his tone like the edge of glass. Enough. Silas looked past him at the glowing screen. The files are transmitting, but you'll never finish. I've seen to that. He pulled a small device from his coat pocket and pressed a button. The lights flickered, the laptop's signal vanishing. Firewall override, Silas said. The same one your father built to protect us from exposure. Poetic, isn't it? Isabella's heart raced. You can't stop the truth. Watch me. Damian's voice broke the silence. You're right about one thing, Silas. The world doesn't care about truth, but it cares about survival. And right now, you're outnumbered. For the first time, Silas hesitated. He looked around, realizing the faint red light blinking on the wall, the one he thought was a signal relay, wasn't connected to the network at all. It was a recording device, Isabella's father's device. Damian smiled. He built more than one failsafe. Silas turned to destroy it, but Isabella had already pressed the final command on the keyboard. The backup signal reactivated, bouncing off a hidden satellite line stored within her father's old encryption key. The file bar filled quickly, the progress racing toward completion. Stop it! Silas shouted, lunging forward. Damian blocked him, the two colliding against the table. The laptop fell, sliding across the floor. Isabella dove to catch it before it hit the wall. The upload reached 100%. The screen blinked once, then displayed a message. Transmission complete. Distribution active. Silas froze. The sound of the storm filled the silence between them. You just buried yourself, he whispered. No, Isabella said. We buried your empire. For the first time, the calm left Silas's face. He backed toward the door, rain sweeping in behind him. You think this makes you heroes? The world will forget you by morning. Then at least we'll be forgotten for the right reasons, Damian said. Silas stared at them one last time before turning and vanishing into the storm. When the door slammed shut, the wind rushed through the lighthouse like a sigh of release. The storm outside was no longer their enemy. It was their witness. Isabella sank to the floor, clutching the laptop. Damian knelt beside her, his hand finding hers. It's over, he said. She shook her head, tears mixing with rain. No, it's beginning, he smiled, pulling her close. Then we face it together. The waves crashed harder, lightning splitting the horizon in gold and silver. The light reflected off the glass fragments of the broken dome, scattering across their faces like stars. Damian brushed her wet hair from her forehead. Do you hear that? She frowned. What? The storm, he said softly. It's not angry anymore. For a long moment they simply listened to the rain, to the wind, to the heartbeat that had carried them through lies and loss. And as dawn began to break through the clouds, painting the sky in quiet colors, Isabella whispered the words her father once told her long ago. Truth never sleeps. Damian smiled, and neither does hope. The storm had passed, but the world they were about to wake into would never be the same again. The storm had passed, but the world was louder than ever. By morning, every major news outlet carried the same headline. Valente Group under investigation for decades of corruption. Beneath it, Damian's name appeared alongside the files Isabella's father had hidden, now verified by independent journalists across the globe. The truth had traveled faster than anyone expected, and with it came the chaos that truth always brings. From the small coastal villa where they had found temporary refuge, Isabella watched the television in silence. Damian stood by the window, the early light turning his reflection into a ghost. His phone had been ringing nonstop since dawn. He hadn't answered once. They're calling you the whistleblower, she said quietly. Some are calling you a traitor. He didn't turn around. They can call me whatever they want. It doesn't change what we did. She looked at him, at the stillness that was beginning to look too much like distance. "You sound like you're already letting go." He turned then, his eyes shadowed but steady. "I'm preparing for what comes next." "What comes next?" she asked, fear threading her voice. "Justice doesn't come free, Isabella. Someone will have to take the fall, and I'm the only one who can." She stood, the weight of those words cutting through her. "You're not the one who should pay. You didn't destroy my father. You tried to protect him." He walked toward her, slow, calm, resolved. "That's not what the world sees. They see my signature on the contracts, my face in every photograph. I was their front, remember? That makes me guilty enough." "No," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't get to trade your life for redemption." He cupped her face gently. "I'm not trading my life. I'm giving meaning to what we did." Her eyes glistened. "You don't need to prove anything." "Yes, I do," he said softly, "because your father believed I could be better than them. And he was right." She wanted to argue, but the truth between them was too heavy. He pressed his forehead to hers. "Promise me you'll stay quiet. Let me go first." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "If you walk into that fire alone, there's no redemption in it, only loss." But Damian had already made his choice. He kissed her one last time, slow, deep, and final. "Then remember this instead, that it wasn't revenge that saved us, it was love." He left before she could stop him. Hours later, he stood before a sea of cameras outside the Ministry of Justice. The world watched as Damian Valente surrendered himself, not as a criminal, but as a man who had finally chosen truth over power. His statement was brief. "I was blind to what I was protecting," he said. "But blindness is not innocent. I accept responsibility for the empire built in my name. The woman who exposed it showed me what courage looks like. I will spend the rest of my life earning what she gave me, the chance to be honest." The footage spread across every channel, and somewhere in the quiet of the villa, Isabella wept, not from grief but from the strange, aching pride of knowing that he had done the impossible. He had turned guilt into grace. Days turned into weeks. Investigations expanded. Arrests followed. Silas Grimaldi disappeared, hunted by his own allies, his power fractured by exposure. The Valente Empire was dismantled piece by piece, and with it went the silence that had ruled for decades. But truth, as her father once said, never sleeps, and it never rests quietly. One evening, while sorting through the files that remained, Isabella found a letter tucked into the old laptop's case. The handwriting was familiar, her father's, but the paper was dated only months before his death. She unfolded it carefully, her hands shaking. "If she finds this, tell her I was never angry. The world isn't divided between villains and saints, Isabella. It's divided between those who run from pain and those who face it. If she meets the man I told her to trust, remind her of this. Redemption isn't about clearing a name. It's about living differently after you've seen the truth. I love you always. Papa." Her tears fell onto the paper, blurring the last line. For a long moment she just sat there, holding it to her chest, listening to the sound of waves breaking outside. Then she rose, took the letter, and stepped into the fading sunlight. At the edge of the cliff, the sea glowed gold beneath the evening sky. The world was still broken, but in that brokenness there was beauty. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned and froze. Damian stood there, thinner, pale, but alive. His suit hung loosely on his frame, the look of a man who had faced everything and somehow survived. Her breath caught. "You... how?" He smiled faintly. "Temporary release, cooperation with the investigation. Apparently, telling the truth still counts for something." She ran to him before her mind could argue. He caught her, holding her against him as if to make sure the world couldn't separate them again. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "You did," he said softly, "but I found my way back." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon. The sea wind carried the scent of salt and forgiveness. He took her hand. "They'll still come for us, you know. The world doesn't forget names like ours easily. Then let them come, she said. We've already survived worse. He laughed quietly. You've changed. So have you, she said. You stopped running. He brushed his thumb against her cheek, looking at her with quiet wonder. Maybe I just found something worth standing still for. The sky dimmed, and for the first time in years, the world didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a beginning. And somewhere deep in the city, an automatic server continued to process the last encrypted files from Isabella's father. Files neither she nor Damian had seen yet. Hidden within them was one final revelation, labeled simply Project Ardent, Phase 2. The nights had grown quieter since Damian's return. The world outside was beginning to move on. But for Isabella and him, time had slowed to something softer, like the calm that comes after a long storm. The sea below the cliffs carried a rhythm that almost sounded like forgiveness. But silence, they both knew, is never empty. It's where truth waits to be heard. Isabella sat at the old desk in the villa, the laptop open in front of her. The folder that had appeared after the investigation, Project Ardent, Phase 2, was still locked. No password, no hint, just that haunting title, like a door half open in the dark. She had tried to ignore it for days, convincing herself that some truths were better left sleeping. But the longer she waited, the more it called to her. Damian entered quietly, a mug of coffee in hand. His sleeves were rolled up, his eyes tired but peaceful. You're still trying? She nodded. It won't open. I've tried every code, every name, even my father's signature. He set the mug beside her. Maybe it's not meant for you. She frowned. Then for who? For both of us, he said, sitting beside her. Try something we share. She stared at the screen, thinking. Then, slowly, she typed 2 words. Moretti Valente. The folder unlocked. The laptop's fan whirred softly, the screen flooding with light. Inside were hundreds of files, but one stood out. A single video marked Final Message. Isabella clicked it. Her father's face appeared again, older than the last recording, his eyes carrying the exhaustion of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. If you're watching this, he said, then the first truth is already free. But this is the one that explains why they fought so hard to keep the rest buried. Damian leaned forward, his breath steady but shallow. Her father continued. Project Ardent was not just about money or influence. It was about control, economic, political, digital. The empire they built used data to manipulate governments, markets, even the press. They didn't just buy silence, they engineered it. He paused, eyes searching the camera. Damian, if you're there, and I believe you are, you were never one of them. You were the only variable they couldn't predict, the only one who believed integrity could exist inside the system. That's why they kept you close, to understand what honesty cost. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, her father's tone softened. You both carry what I could not finish. The first phase exposed corruption. The second will dismantle its roots. But be warned, the people who built it are still alive and their reach is endless. The file you need to end it completely is hidden under a name only you two will understand. He smiled faintly. Find the word that means freedom to you both. When you do, the world will change again. The video ended. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of waves drifted through the open window, mingling with the quiet hum of the laptop. Freedom, Damian murmured. What does that mean to you? She turned to him, her voice soft. It means finally being able to choose love without fear. He smiled gently. Then type that. She hesitated. Then typed the word amare. Another lock opened. The screen displayed a new document, coordinates, bank codes, and a list of global corporations secretly controlled by what remained of Silas's network. Project Arden hadn't ended with Silas. It was bigger than any of them imagined. Damian's expression hardened. This is what destroyed your father. This is what they'll kill for. And what we can finally end, she said. He stood, pacing slowly, thinking. If we release this, the system collapses. Economies, governments, everything. The truth this big doesn't set people free, Isabella. It burns the world down. She closed the laptop gently. Then maybe it's time to burn what was never real? He looked at her for a long moment. And what about us? Her voice trembled, but she met his gaze. We survived lies. We can survive truth. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint sound of thunder far out at sea. Damian sighed, sitting beside her once more. Your father trusted me with his secret. I'll trust you with this one. You decide what happens next. She placed her hand over his. No, we decide together. He smiled faintly. You really have his courage. She shook her head. No, I have yours. The night deepened. The storm drew closer, lightning flashing faintly on the horizon. Isabella opened the laptop one last time, her finger hovering over the key that would release the second phase of the truth. But before she could press it, a message appeared on the screen, an alert from an unknown source. Incoming transmission. You think it's over? Project Ardent was never ours to control. The screen went black. Damian stood, tension returning to his voice. They've traced it. Someone's inside. She stared at the laptop, her reflection flickering in the dark glass. Then they know we're still alive. He reached for her hand. Then we give them a reason to regret it. Lightning illuminated the room, followed by a low roll of thunder. The storm was coming again, stronger than before. And in that storm waited the final truth, the one that could save everything or destroy it for good. The storm reached the shore long before dawn. Rain hammered the villa roof like 1,000 clocks counting down. Inside, the lights flickered, shadows stretching across the walls as if the house itself was holding its breath. The laptop still glowed on the table, frozen on that single message. You think it's over? Project Ardent was never ours to control. Damian stood beside the window, watching the waves tear at the coast. His reflection looked like a man split in two, the one who wanted to fight and the one who feared what fighting would cost. Isabella paced behind him, her arms crossed. Who sent it? He turned. Not Silas. He's gone. This is something bigger. Someone who knew your father's system. Someone inside it, she said. He nodded. Or above it. The wind howled. The lights dimmed again. Damian walked to the table and unplugged the laptop. No signal, no network. From now on, everything stays offline. She frowned. That won't stop them. Whoever they are, they've been watching since before we started this. Then they'll have to watch it end. He closed the curtains, locking the doors. The air smelled of rain and electricity. For the first time in weeks, Isabella saw fear in him. Not the kind that paralyzes, but the kind that wakes something ancient inside a person. They won't stop until they control the narrative again, she said quietly. Damian looked at her. Then we'll give them one they can't rewrite. She opened the laptop again, this time offline. The files inside Project Ardent, Phase 2, contain not only corporate secrets but also a blueprint, software designed to predict market behavior, political shifts, even social unrest. It wasn't just corruption, it was manipulation on a scale her father had barely understood before he died. Isabella scrolled through lines of code, her voice trembling. This program could rewrite the world's economy with a single update. Damian leaned closer. Or destroy it. She turned to him. My father didn't create this to hurt people. He built it to reveal how power moves, to expose the lies. But someone hijacked it, and they're still using it. Damian, probably even now. She closed the laptop with trembling hands. If we release this, it won't just end them. It could bring down governments, currencies, maybe everything. He met her eyes. Then maybe the world deserves to start over. She hesitated. And what about us? He smiled faintly. Maybe we do too. Thunder rolled across the horizon. The sound felt biblical, ancient. Outside, the waves glowed white under the lightning. Isabella walked to the window, her voice soft but certain. You said once that truth burns the world down. Maybe it's time to see what grows after the fire. He came up behind her, his voice almost a whisper. Then we do it together. She nodded, turning back to him. Together. But before she could move, the lights went out completely. The entire villa plunged into darkness. A second later, the laptop screen flickered on again. By itself, words began to appear across it, typed by unseen hands. We warned your father. He didn't listen. Now his daughter follows his path. If you send the second phase, millions will fall. Power cannot be destroyed. It only changes hands. Isabella stepped back, her pulse quickening. They're in the system again. Damian grabbed the laptop, slamming it shut. Not for long. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small metal drive, one of the backups they had created before the first upload. We end this the only way possible. We take it to the source. She looked at him, confused. The source? The Ardent servers, the original ones. Your father mentioned them once, hidden under the company's research facility in Geneva. She blinked. That place was shut down years ago. Exactly, he said, which means they still think it's invisible. She stared at him for a moment, realizing the weight of his plan. You want to destroy the system from inside. He nodded, permanently. She took a slow breath. Then we'll need help. I already called someone, he said quietly. An old contact in the European Commission. She owes me a favor. If we make it there, she can give us access to the lower vaults. When do we leave? As soon as the storm clears. But the storm wasn't waiting for permission. The wind grew stronger, shaking the windows. The lights outside the villa flickered faintly. Movement, not lightning. Damian crossed to the door, peering through the crack. 3 black SUVs were parked at the base of the hill. Men in coats, silhouettes moving through the rain. They found us, he said. She grabbed the drive and stuffed it into her coat. Then we go now. They slipped through the back, into the darkness. Rain soaked them instantly, but the noise worked in their favor. Damian led the way down the narrow path to the cove, where their old boat waited under a tarp. The waves crashed violently against the rocks, but neither hesitated. Once aboard, Damian started the engine. We'll head north until sunrise. With luck, they'll think we drowned. She clung to the side rail, shouting over the wind. And if we don't make it to Geneva? He looked at her, eyes steady even in chaos. Then we make it somewhere that still believes in truth. Lightning tore the sky apart, illuminating the ocean in fractured silver. For a heartbeat, it looked as if the world itself had cracked open. Hours later, as dawn began to bleed into the clouds, the storm broke. The sea calmed into ripples, and the Swiss coast appeared like a shadow ahead. Damian exhaled, relief mixing with exhaustion. We made it, she whispered. For now, he said. They docked at a small private port and slipped through the city in silence. Geneva was quiet at sunrise, its streets washed clean by rain. The Valente Group's old research facility stood on the outskirts, abandoned, gray, its windows shuttered. Inside, dust hung in the air like forgotten time. They descended into the lower level, following old power lines and broken signs. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Finally, they reached a vault door sealed by steel. Damian placed his hand on the biometric scanner. It blinked once and turned green. He smiled faintly. Some ghosts never die. The door opened with a low groan. Inside, the server room still pulsed with light. Machines hummed softly, alive despite years of supposed shutdown. Isabella's breath caught. It's still running. She approached the central console, wiping the dust from the screen. A message glowed faintly. Welcome, Administrator Valente. Damian's jaw tightened. They used my name to keep it alive. She inserted the metal drive. Then it's time your name ends it. The system began to decrypt, lines of code flashing like lightning. The hum of the servers grew louder, the lights flickering as if the network itself resisted. Then a voice, mechanical, cold, filled the room. Authorization confirmed. Uploading purge protocol will result in permanent data loss. Are you certain? Damian looked at Isabella. "This is it." She took his hand, her voice firm. "Do it." He pressed the command. The room filled with sound, alarms, static, the shattering hum of machines dying one by one. Screens went black, lights flickered out, and the hum that had lasted for years finally stopped. Silence returned. Damian exhaled, shoulders lowering as the servers cooled. "It's done." But before Isabella could answer, one final monitor flickered back to life. A single line appeared across it. Phase 3, activation complete. The color drained from Damian's face. What did we just start? The screen changed again, displaying a map of the world, red dots spreading slowly across continents. Isabella stared in horror. It wasn't just a program. It was a system, one that learns from destruction. He whispered, "Your father didn't build this part." The lights dimmed again, the sound of power surging through circuits that should have been dead. Isabella's voice trembled. "Then who did?" And before Damian could answer, a message appeared on the final line of the screen. "Welcome back, Damian Valente. The world still belongs to us." The servers went dark. The silence inside the underground vault was unbearable. Only the sound of rain filtered through the cracks above, distant and ghostly. The servers had gone dark, but their legacy hadn't. On the last monitor, the red dots continued to spread, pulsing across the world like veins carrying something unstoppable. Isabella stood frozen, her hand still clutching Damian's. "It's learning," she whispered. "The system survived the purge. It's using everything we uploaded." Damian's eyes followed the lights moving across the map. "It's rewriting itself," he said. "Your father's code was too advanced. Someone else must have finished it after he died." "Then it's not just a program anymore," she said. "It's alive." He turned to her, his voice calm but certain. "We can still stop it." She shook her head. "How?" "It's everywhere now." Damian walked to the main console, his steps echoing in the cold room. "There's one way. If we overload the power grid and sever the satellite link, it'll force a hard collapse. No recovery. That would destroy everything connected to it," she said softly. "Every system, every database, even the evidence we just released." He met her eyes. "It's the only way to keep it from controlling the truth again." For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the low hum of the dying machines filled the space between them. Isabella stepped closer. "If we do this, the world will never know what really happened." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe the truth isn't meant to be owned, only lived." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "Then we do it together." He nodded once, pulling the emergency panel from the wall. Sparks flew as he rewired the main conduit, each motion deliberate, careful. Isabella joined him, feeding the final command through the terminal. "Overload sequence ready." Damian looked at her one last time, his voice soft. "If this works, the grid will fail in seconds. You need to get clear. I'm not leaving you. You have to." She shook her head, tears glimmering. "We started this together. We end it together." He exhaled, the faintest trace of a smile breaking through. "You really are your father's daughter. And you're the man he believed in," she whispered. The system lights turned red. A countdown appeared on the final screen. 0:10. They stood side by side as the world above began to tremble. The hum grew louder, like the sound of thunder trapped underground. 5 seconds, she whispered. Damian turned to her, rainwater dripping from the cracks above, lighting his face in gold. "If we don't make it out," she silenced him with a kiss. It wasn't desperate or rushed. It was slow, certain, infinite. Everything they had fought for distilled into a single breath. When they pulled apart, she smiled through her tears. "Now we've both kept our promises." The light around them exploded. The servers flared once, then went silent forever. The map disappeared. The storm outside collapsed into stillness, and then darkness. When Isabella opened her eyes again, she was lying on the cliffside above the facility. The rain had stopped. The sun was rising, its light soft and golden across the sea. She coughed, gasping for air, her body trembling. Damian? No answer. She pushed herself up, scanning the rocks. Then she saw him, half buried under debris near the entrance, motionless. She crawled to him, her heart breaking with every inch. Damian, she whispered, brushing the dirt from his face. His eyes fluttered open. You made it, she laughed through her tears. We made it. He tried to sit up, pain flashing across his features. The system? Gone, she said, completely. It's over. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from peace, not relief. Good. She pressed her forehead to his. Don't you dare leave me now. I'm not, he whispered. Not this time. The sun rose higher, painting the sea in fire and gold. The world around them was quiet again, but alive, a silence that felt earned. Damian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key, tarnished by time. Your father gave me this, said it belonged to the man who would protect his daughter when he couldn't. She looked at it, her throat tight. Then it was always meant for you. He pressed it into her hand. No, it's for us, for whatever comes next. She closed her fingers around it, nodding. Then, let's go home. He smiled softly. Wherever you are, that already is home. They stood together at the edge of the cliff, the wind rising gently around them. Below, the sea shimmered with light, and the world felt new again, unfinished but free. Isabella turned to him, her voice quiet but strong. What do we tell them? When they ask what happened, he looked toward the horizon. Tell them the truth, and if they don't believe it, he smiled, then tell them we lived it. The waves crashed below, carrying the past away. Above them, the first light of a new dawn broke through the clouds, soft, pure, endless. They stood in silence, hand in hand, watching as the sun rose over a world finally ready to begin again.